you, Professor Schlaus, and thank you also to the colleagues from CERN for the invitation to this important meeting. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we should be celebrating the benefits of science and technology. Science and technology, in principle, should pave the way to a better future for everybody. We see that in the area of health, for example. There has been tremendous progress in terms of health and the diagnosis of health conditions. For example, also in the area of education. In neighboring history, there has been so many people who have access to education and training and new knowledge. And of course, science and technology has been a factor facilitating this, obviously. We see that also in principle in the area of more inclusiveness, because this particular wave of new technology has that characteristic that it facilitates inclusive involvement of different groups in society, of the economy. And so I think that's also a very important potential benefit as well, and in principle as well in terms of development. So I think there are many things that and many benefits that could be highlighted and identified associated with science and technology, and basically the main benefits could be in principle in terms of better prosperity for everybody, a more secure future for everybody as well. And Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize, emphasized the question of capabilities as an element of progress in general in society, the ability of people through precisely science and technology to have the possibility to have choice in life. And I think the issue of capability was coined by him. And I think science and technology in principle can bring more capabilities to everybody. And also science and technology by definition should be much more future-oriented, which is extremely important for progress of societies, to have a vision to orient collective action towards future, and that's very important in order to address a number of irreversibilities. This, of course, is in principle. Unfortunately, the reality today is not like that. We see a disconnect between science and technology progress, which is real, and we see examples, for example, in medicine and health, on the one hand, and the state of societies today in the world. Let me mention three big problems. The first one has to do with inequalities. Even though, in principle, science and technology should facilitate access to the economy, access to resources, access to participation in society, much more than in the past, with past waves of science and technology, we see, on the contrary, inequalities rising in most countries in the world. And in particular, I would say, in the labor market, even though young people are much better educated than ever before in history of humanity, there is much more unemployment among educated youth. Unemployment among educated youth, including in many developing countries, apart from 4 or 5 countries in the world. In all other countries in the world, youth unemployment is 2 to 3 times higher than adult unemployment, and youth unemployment among educated youth is rising. So that's a major stumbling block, and we see more inequalities in general, intergenerational, but also across groups in the world. So I think that promise, that potential benefit of science and technology is actually not verified in practice. Another major problem has to do with insecurity. Instead of bringing more capability to people, more ability to have choice in their life, more space for taking decisions, actually we see more insecurity. The world of work today, in particular, I'm sorry to speak about that, but this is the ILO, and we are of course in touch with the labor market, with jobs, with people who work in enterprises. The world of work today is characterized by more and more uncertainties, more and more precariousness, and more insecurities. Not for everybody, of course, but certainly that's very important. And I think there is a certain connection with new technology, because the way new technology is implemented today, this is very important. In reality and in real world, new technology means today a fragmentation of production processes. It is possible today, thanks to new technology, to fragment production much more than ever before in the history of capitalism, to slice production in different stages, and therefore to contract out even at the level of the individual. And that, of course, offers, again, many potential benefits, but in practical terms, in many cases, it also means more insecurity, and we see much more precarious employment rising in advanced economies, short-term contract, for example, in my country, Spain, who thought there would be so many one-week contracts given to people, more interim employment, etc., etc., and in developing countries, informal employment. So half humanity who has a job today has a job which is an informal job, broadly 48%. So, and this is not going down very much. So not more security, but rather more insecurity. Inequalities, insecurity, and the third potential benefit, and I think it's a real one of science and technology by definition, is to pave the way to a better future, more future-oriented societies. It's inherent to the notion of science and technology. We actually see great threats to the sustainability of the planet in terms of the environment, obviously, but also in terms of society itself, because these inequalities, what it really means in practical terms is that the social contract, which is very much inherent to the stability of political systems, is under threat because inequalities are rising and because the youth unemployment is not just a technical issue, it's also a very fundamental issue for the stability of societies. And we see actually examples in terms of the Arab Spring, fragmentation of political systems in a number of countries and more countries. So we're talking about, instead of paving the way to a better future, actually threats to the sustainability of the environment, but also of societies themselves. And in the economic system, a very important polemic fact, if I can use the epistemological terminology here, is that even though science and technology has made tremendous progress, a leap forward, we don't see the equivalent in terms of productivity growth. Normally, in past episodes of science and technology revolutions, if science and technology was associated with a speed up of productivity growth. This is what, in a way, creates the space for more welfare creation, for more investment, for better jobs, etc., etc. Productivity growth. And this wave of science and technology is not associated with higher productivity growth, at least so far. There is a lot of research going on about that in economic science, but certainly one can say, at least from the point of view of the facts that we see so far, we don't see more productivity growth, which actually suggests that there is a problem in the way science and technology is implemented today. So a lot of promises, a lot of potential benefits, but actually three very important, I think, threats to society. So what can be done about it? I think this has to do a lot. We could have a meeting about that, because that's, I think, to some extent, not a completely understood issue, and we need more research. But I think that one of the problems has to do with precisely social responsibility. I think, why do we need social responsibility? We need social responsibility because this wave of science and technology has shifted risks tremendously compared to past waves of science and technology. The risk is now shifted to the individual, whereas before it was much more spread in society, and also policymakers knew how to deal with that kind of risk. This type of science and technology revolution actually is shifting the risk very much at the individual level, and it requires a new notion, a new vision for social responsibility, and I think, very importantly, to involve the enterprise into the picture, so be associated more with the responsibility how new science and technology is implemented. For example, production today is organized in global value chains because of fragmentation of production, but responsibility is nowhere in the production chain. And this has to be brought back into the global value chains, and this is one of the areas where ILO is doing some work. We're having a discussion at the International Labour Conference next year, but I'm afraid that it will take a few years before we reintroduce social responsibility concretely in the production system, so that science and technology leads to these elements of progress which are promised. Another very important area has to do with collective action. What has happened with science and technology, the way it takes place today, it is implemented, is that it has a global reach, whereas much of the policies have a national application. And in many ways, what we have tried to do over the past few years, of course in WHO, certainly in CERN, in the ILO, etc., is to reintroduce collective action for things which are escaping the ability of national states to address. And I think it's very important that the scientific community in particular, and I think that may be a concluding point because I understand I'm exhausting my time, is connected to the main place today where collective action is taking place, which is the G20, because it has proved to be the main forum where the global crisis was addressed. And of course, in the UN, it's a very positive step that a scientific committee was created. I think that's very important. But the results of that scientific committee, of the work of CERN, of the work of the ILO in terms of research and understanding how to better connect science and technology with those big issues I was mentioned before, inequalities, insecurities, irreversibilities, and sustainabilities, is also brought to the agenda of the G20, because this is where the issue of collective action and new possibilities for collective action are discussed at the moment. Thank you very much.